My name is Jessica, and I paid the mortgage on my parents' house for 8 straight years, quietly, without thanks. But the day I walked in and saw my daughter being humiliated in that same home by the people I'd been supporting, something snapped. They used my money and broke my child. Now they'll learn what happens when a mother stops paying and starts fighting. Before we dive into this emotional story of betrayal, justice, and one mother's fierce love, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? I read every single one. And if you've ever had to stand up for someone you love, hit that like button and subscribe. This story might just be the one you needed today. I should have trusted my gut the second I stepped out of the car and heard the laughter through the screen door. It wasn't happy laughter. It was the kind that stung, sharp, smug, and mean. I recognized the voices before I even opened the door. Grace and Lily, my nieces, practically raised under the same roof as my daughter Olivia, yet always a little higher on the invisible family totem pole. The smell of lemon-scented cleaner hit me first, that over-sanitized scent that tried to scream, cozy, but only reminded me how many messes had been swept under this rug over the years. Then I saw her. Olivia stood in the middle of the kitchen, clutching a dripping sponge, her eyes wide and watery. Grandma Helen was looming over her, my mother firm-voiced and frigid with that familiar scolding tone reserved for us ungrateful girls. Unwashed dishes again? You had one job, Olivia. And then came the snickering. Cinderella has chores again, Grace whispered, not even trying to hide it. Lily elbowed her, giggling into her hoodie sleeve like it was a middle school sleepover, not a living room where my child was being berated. I was across the tile in 3 seconds flat. Don't you ever speak to her like that, I said, my voice low but volcanic. Olivia jumped, but I didn't look at her. I was locked on Grace, who suddenly remembered she had a cuticle to inspect. My hand went to Olivia's arm automatically, pulling her gently but firmly away from the scene. She didn't resist. Small fingers wrapped around my wrist like a lifeline, and I could feel the tension vibrating in her bones. She didn't cry, that was worse somehow. What is going on here? I turned to my mother, who barely blinked. Same pinched lips, same tired sigh. Oh, Jessica, they were just playing, don't be dramatic. My jaw clenched. Is that what we're calling it now? Girls tease, it's harmless. Olivia tucked herself behind me as if trying to disappear. She's 10, I said, and she's not a punching bag. Grace and Lily had slinked toward the hallway, but I caught one last glance exchanged between them, mocking, superior. Like they knew they could get away with it, because they always had. I turned back to Olivia, knelt beside her, and brushed a tear from her cheek. We're leaving, I said quietly. But you just got here, Mom protested, arms crossed, as though I was the one making the scene. I didn't answer, I didn't have to. I could feel every bit of oxygen draining from the room as I led Olivia out. In the hallway, where the familiar creak in the floorboard betrayed years of childhood footsteps, Olivia whispered, Mom, am I really Cinderella? I stopped walking. You know that moment where your heart breaks and hardens all at once? That was it. No, I said, kneeling again so she could see my face clearly. You're Olivia, and they don't get to treat you like less. Not anymore. The front door slammed behind us harder than I meant it to, but I didn't look back. I wouldn't. Not this time, because something shifted in that hallway, something real. I'd spent years keeping the peace, paying the bills, buying time with silent sacrifice. But this, they touched my daughter. They laughed while she hurt. And they did it under a roof I've been silently financing for nearly a decade. So no, I wasn't going to beg for civility anymore. I wasn't going to fund it either. They thought the silence was support. They were about to find out what it meant when that silence ended. That night, the silence in our kitchen wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, but before the wreckage is truly discovered. Michael sat across from me, still in his button-down from work, sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed as he stirred his tea without drinking it. We didn't usually drink chamomile. Tonight it felt like we were borrowing someone else's calm. I should have seen it sooner, I said, tapping through tabs on my laptop. I should have pulled the plug years ago. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned back in his chair and watched me, not judgmentally, not dismissively, just watching, like he knew I wasn't talking to him as much as trying to finally talk to myself. I had pulled up 8 years' worth of payments, line after line of mortgage statements, utilities, property taxes, even those sneaky little HOA fees no one ever talks about. All set to auto-pay from my own account. My name never on the deed, of course, just the money, always the money. I've been carrying them, I said, quietly, so they could sit in that cozy house, sipping coffee while my daughter gets called Cinderella. Michael reached across the table, his hand settling on mine. You were trying to help, you've always tried. I let out a soft, bitter laugh. And for what? So Olivia could grow up thinking she's second class in a house I pay for. I clicked over to the mortgage portal, cursor hovering on the auto-pay settings. My stomach twisted a little, which surprised me. Even after today, after everything, I still felt that old tug, the daughter instinct, the one trained to keep everyone afloat no matter how much I sank. But I couldn't afford that instinct anymore, not when it came at Olivia's expense. Are you sure? Michael asked, gently but not trying to stop me. I didn't answer, I just clicked. Cancel autopay. A tiny pop-up appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment? Yes, I did. Yes, I needed to. I hit confirm. The screen blinked. The button turned gray. The confirmation message glowed at me like a cold verdict. It was done. 8 years, hundreds of payments, thousands of dollars, and now, silence. Michael exhaled slowly as if he'd been holding his breath this whole time. They're going to notice fast. Good, I said. Let them. I closed the laptop and pushed it away, suddenly exhausted. My tea had gone cold. Olivia was asleep upstairs, finally resting after crying herself out during her bath. She hadn't said much after we left my parents' place. Just held onto my hand too tightly, like she was afraid I'd vanish too. I'd kissed her forehead, tucked her in, and whispered the same thing over and over. No one gets to make you feel small. Ever. Michael stood and walked around me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. I leaned into him, grateful for his warmth but still simmering inside. They're going to call, he murmured. I know. They're going to play victim. I know. He kissed the top of my head. And you're going to be ready. I nodded against his chest, not because I felt brave, but because there was no other choice anymore. It's strange how fast a boundary can form once it finally cracks through years of people-pleasing. One moment you're nodding politely through insults disguised as jokes, and the next, you're canceling a mortgage payment and mentally rewriting your entire family history. I had carried that house. Carried my parents through their retirement worries, my brother's financial flops, the cousins who just needed a place to crash for the summer and never left. And somehow, even while footing every bill, I'd let them convince me I owed them more. Well, they were about to learn what it felt like when the woman they leaned on stood up instead. It took exactly 2 days. I was halfway through writing a client proposal at work when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks, Dad. I stared at it for a moment, letting it ring. 5 seconds. 10. I knew what this was about. I picked up on the 7th ring, not because I owed him anything, but because silence was no longer my currency. Jessica, he said, voice rushed like he hadn't meant to speak yet. Hi, Dad. A pause, long enough for discomfort to settle in on both ends of the line. The bank called. I almost smiled. There it was. Not how are you, not we miss you. Just straight to the inconvenience. They said the mortgage payment didn't go through, said it's been interrupted or something. I leaned back in my chair, twirling a pen slowly between my fingers. It has. Did something happen? Yes, I wanted to say. Something finally happened. Instead, I said, the payment stopped, Dad, just like my tolerance. Another pause. I imagined him in that old recliner, the one I bought during a Labor Day sale because Mom said his back hurt too much for their worn-out one. I pictured him rubbing his temple, searching for the right script. You should have told us, he said finally. We weren't prepared for this. Oh, you were prepared for 8 years of my direct deposits, but not for one moment of accountability. His voice cracked just slightly. Jess, you're upset, but we're family. Family helps each other. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. I agree, I've helped for 8 years. And last week I watched your granddaughter be mocked and degraded in your home while everyone stood by. Is that your definition of family? There was a shuffle on his end. Maybe he stood up. Maybe he couldn't sit with this truth. Good, I'd been sitting with it long enough. We didn't know that was happening. You knew she washed everyone's dishes. You knew Grace and Lily called her names. You knew she was different in that house, and you let it happen. Your mother. Don't, I said, sharper than I intended. Don't shift this to Mom. You've watched it all unfold just the same. The silence turned heavy, leaden. He didn't deny it. Finally, he tried again. So what now? You're just cutting us off. I'm stopping what never should have been expected in the first place. You want me to feel guilty. I did for years. Now I just feel tired. He sighed, not angry, not defiant, just small, and that shook me more than if he'd yelled. We're not bad people, he said softly. We just thought we were doing our best. I closed my laptop gently. Your best shouldn't cost me my daughter's dignity. Another pause, a door creaked open in the background, Mom maybe. I heard faint voices hurried. I have to go, he said, rushed now. We'll talk later. Maybe, I said, and then I hung up. No screaming. No slam, just an end. I sat there for a moment longer, staring at the office window as the world moved on outside. He wasn't wrong, exactly. They weren't villains. But that's the thing about family pain. It doesn't need to come wrapped in malice. Sometimes it's just the slow decay of responsibility, the soft corrosion of boundaries that no one ever intended to cross, until one day you realize you're buried under their weight. When I got home that evening, Olivia was sitting at the kitchen table, sketching. She didn't look up right away, but I could see the difference already. Her shoulders weren't curled inward like before. There was color in her cheeks again. How was school? I asked, setting down my keys. She shrugged, then hesitated. Ms. Radley asked about the drawing I left in my cubby, the one with the mean stick figures. My heart squeezed. What did you tell her? That they're not real anymore, she said, looking up at me. Because you see me. I nodded, eyes blurring slightly. Yes, baby. I always have. 2 days later, I was called into the school, not in that alarm bells way, but the kind that comes softly, through a warm voice and a scheduled time. Mrs. Reed, the voicemail said. This is Ms. Radley, Olivia's counselor. I was wondering if you might have time for a quick check-in this week. Nothing urgent, just something I'd like to share. I called her back during lunch break and scheduled a meeting for the next morning. Michael offered to come with me, but I shook my head. I think I need to hear this one alone. The school was only 15 minutes away, nestled in a quiet Cincinnati suburb, its brick facade softened by early spring ivy and chalk messages on the sidewalks. It felt like a bubble, somewhere children should be safe. But bubbles burst too, don't they? Ms. Radley's office was pastel and peaceful, like a dollhouse had grown up and become a therapist. She greeted me with a kind smile, not the overly sweet kind I've learned to be suspicious of, but something real, thoughtful. Thank you for coming, Jessica. Of course, I said, taking the chair opposite her desk. Is Olivia okay? She nodded. She's fine, she's quieter than most, but observant, creative, and she's been trying to say something in her own way. That's when she reached into a folder on her desk and pulled out a sheet of paper, a drawing. At first glance, it was childish, colorful, scattered. Crayon scrawls and stick figures. But then I looked closer. A small girl stood in the middle, labeled in careful letters, Trash. All around her were larger stick figures, laughing, pointing. Speech bubbles above them filled with jagged lines and words like lazy, crybaby, and spoiled. The girl had no mouth. My breath caught. Ms. Radley watched me gently, no judgment, just patience. She drew this last week, she said, before the parent-teacher night. I asked her about it, and she said she didn't remember what it was, but I think she does. I traced the outline of the little girl's pigtails, the way her arms dangled, limp, how even the sun in the corner had no smile. She thinks she's invisible, I whispered. Ms. Radley didn't respond right away, just let the truth settle between us. She's had a hard time feeling safe with her extended family. It's not unusual for kids to process that through art. I swallowed hard. And she kept it in her cubby. She nodded. Like she wanted someone to find it, not hand it over, not speak it, just leave the evidence behind. A bitter weight pressed on my chest. This was what my daughter had been carrying silently while I worked extra hours and wrote holiday checks and pretended everything was fine at the family dinner table. I never meant to let her get lost, I said, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. You didn't, Ms. Radley replied gently. You're here now. That matters. She laid out another form in front of me, an introduction packet for art therapy. Weekly sessions, expressive support, tools to help Olivia use what's already inside her to make sense of the outside. It's voluntary, of course, but I think she could benefit from a space that's hers, somewhere she can draw without needing to explain every line. I nodded, already reaching for the pen. Yes, 1,000 times yes. I think she needs to see herself on the page as something more than trash, I said softly. She will, Ms. Radley replied, and she'll see it through your eyes first. As I walked out with the drawing tucked into my purse like a sacred document, I thought about every time I'd told Olivia, "You're strong," and every time I hadn't noticed how tired she was from holding it all in. We think kids don't see, but they see everything. They see the way adults excuse cruelty. They hear the laughter that cuts just a little too deep. They notice when no one stands up for them. But now she would see something else. She'd see me. Not the silent daughter anymore. Not the quiet sponsor of family peace. A mother and a mother. She doesn't wait for permission to protect her child. The message came late that night, tucked between spam texts and a shipping update for Olivia's new school backpack. Just a simple ping from a name I hadn't seen in months. Thomas. My older brother. We hadn't been close in years. Not estranged exactly, just faded. Like wallpaper that still hangs but no one notices anymore. Proud of you. That's all it said. I stared at the screen for a long minute, rereading the 3 words as if they might suddenly rearrange themselves into something less strange. Or more true. Proud of me. This from the man who used to roll his eyes every time I confronted Mom, who'd always taken the don't rock the boat approach, who once told me, "Let it go, Jess. You know how she is." I waited a few minutes, unsure if I should respond. Then I simply typed, "Wanna talk?" He replied in seconds, "Tomorrow, Denny's. 11, classic, Denny's neutral territory, no emotional lighting, just sticky menus and free refills." When I got there the next morning, he was already seated at a booth near the back, stirring sugar into his black coffee like it owed him something. "Hey," I said, sliding in across from him. "Hey," he replied. No hug, no awkward smile. But his eyes met mine, steady. "I wasn't sure if that text was meant for me," I said lightly. "It was." Silence stretched between us as a waitress dropped off a second cup of coffee and a bowl of creamers. I didn't touch them. He finally spoke. "I heard what happened. Mom's been vocal," I snorted. "Let me guess, I've destroyed the family. And financially endangered their retirement, apparently," he added, eyes narrowing. I raised an eyebrow. "She left that part out of her calls," I said. "Yeah," he muttered. "She's telling everyone you're unraveling. Because I stopped paying her mortgage. No, because you stopped being quiet." There it was. I leaned back, watching him carefully. "So why the message?" Thomas looked down at his coffee as if the swirl of cream might give him courage. "Because I saw it too, Jess." That stopped me. "You did," he nodded. "I saw how they treated you, how you were always expected to be the peacemaker, the giver, the one who never complained. While I got praised for doing the bare minimum." My throat tightened. "You never said anything." I didn't want to see it clearly. It was easier that way. I bought into it too, played the good son role, stayed out of it. I let that settle in. "I used to think," he continued, "that you were just high-strung, too intense, but I've been watching from a distance, and now, I don't think you were ever the problem. You were the only one paying attention." His words hit something raw and overdue inside me. "Why now?" I asked. "Because Olivia," he said softly. "Because that kid looked at me during Thanksgiving last year like I wasn't safe, like I might laugh too." I remembered that day. How Olivia had stayed glued to my side even when the cousins played outside. How she'd flinched when someone joked about her weird drawings. Thomas sighed. "I didn't say anything then. I should have. I'm sorry." I nodded, not ready to forgive, not needing to either, but hearing it, finally hearing it, mattered. He took a sip of coffee. "You know what Mom told me last week?" "What?" "That you always acted like you were better than the rest of us." I laughed, bitter and short. "Because I paid their bills." "No, because you stopped accepting the scraps and called it love." We both sat with that for a moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. "I think you're doing the right thing, Jess, for you, for Olivia, for everyone too afraid to upset the system." My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my mug. "Thank you," I whispered. Not because he'd absolved me, but because he'd acknowledged what so many others refused to. I wasn't burning the house down. I was finally walking out of it. And someone finally saw the smoke, too. I should have known something was off the moment we pulled into the church parking lot. There were too many cars. Olivia sat beside me in the back seat, fidgeting with the frayed strap of her tote bag. She didn't speak, but her silence was loaded, like she could already sense we were walking into something sharp and wrong. Michael gave me a quick glance from the driver's seat. "Want to turn around?" "No," I said too fast. "Let's just go inside. They said it was a simple talk." Right, a simple talk. That's how my mother phrased it when she called earlier in the week, her voice breathless with performative warmth. "We'd love for you to come to Sunday service, sweetie. It's been too long. Let's have a moment of unity." Unity. I should have recognized the tone. The same syrupy pitch she used when inviting me to help plan family holidays that somehow became entirely my responsibility. Still, some foolish part of me wanted to believe this time might be different, that after everything, maybe they'd finally softened. But as soon as we stepped into the chapel's heavy double doors, I knew. It wasn't peace. It was a trap. I spotted them instantly, the front pews packed with family. Not just Mom and Dad, but everyone. Grace and Lily seated beside Aunt Miriam. Uncle Paul, arms folded, jaw tight. Even Ms. Wilkins, my mother's bridge partner, clutching her hymn book like it might shield her from the drama. And in the center of it all, my mother, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she hadn't even bothered to moisten yet. Her mascara was flawless. "Oh," she came. She breathed dramatically, rising to greet me as if I were a celebrity guest crashing a funeral. "I didn't realize this would be a gathering," I said carefully, glancing around. "We just thought the Lord's house would be a safe place to talk," she said, voice trembling just enough to draw sympathy from the onlookers. "You've caused so much distance in the family lately, Jess." Behind me, Michael's hand gently touched my elbow. Olivia clung to my side, suddenly wary. The pastor approached then, Pastor Edwin, a soft-spoken man I remembered from my teenage years, now caught between neutrality and obligation. "Jessica," he said kindly, "it might help to have a moment of reflection. We've all been praying for restoration." Restoration. Not understanding, not accountability. Just the neat, tidy packaging of silence and forgiveness. I didn't move, just stood there, surrounded like prey in a velvet trap. And then the voices started. "She won't answer my calls," Aunt Miriam said. "We all make mistakes," Uncle Paul muttered. "It's Christmas in a few months," someone whispered from the second pew. "She's going to ruin it again." Michael started to step forward, but I reached out gently. "I've got this." I turned to my mother. "Is this what you meant by unity?" I asked, my voice steady. "A staged intervention with a full audience?" She flinched, but quickly recovered. "We're only here because we love you. Because we want to understand." I looked slowly at each face. The ones who had eaten meals I paid for, slept under the roof I subsidized, smiled politely while my daughter shrank inside herself. "You're not here because you love me," I said, my voice low but carrying. "You're here because I stopped paying." A stunned silence. I could see it in their eyes, the flicker of recognition, the hint of shame, but not enough to stop them from judging. Never enough for that. "I didn't come here to defend myself," I continued. "I came because I thought maybe, just maybe, there was still a sliver of decency left in this family." "Jessica, please," my mother whispered, reaching for my hand. I pulled it back. "You had a chance to be decent when Olivia was treated like a servant in your house, when your granddaughters laughed at her and you called it play, when you let her believe she was less while you smiled and looked away." From the corner of my eye, I saw Olivia straighten slightly. "You let it happen," I said, my voice thick now. "And the only time you called me back was when the money stopped flowing." Pastor Edwin opened his mouth to interject, but I held up a hand. "I'm not here to be healed. I'm not broken. I'm here to say I see all of you, and my daughter sees it too." Olivia's fingers slipped into mine, her grip stronger than I expected. I turned to leave. And this time, no one followed. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was anxious, those days had passed, but because I was finally fully awake. By sunrise, I had everything ready. Every document, every dollar, every fact they thought I'd be too polite to mention. Michael helped me load the car in silence. He didn't ask if I was sure. He knew better than to question momentum. Olivia came downstairs dressed in her favorite sunflower dress, the one that made her feel sunny on the inside, she'd told me once. She took my hand. "Are we going to the church again?" I nodded. "Just for a little while." She didn't flinch this time. When we walked into the sanctuary, I carried more than a purse, I carried proof. The same family members from last week filled the pews again. This time less smug, more cautious. Like they'd heard just enough truth to feel the tremble but still thought they could hold their footing. Pastor Edwin met me at the front. "We didn't expect." "I know," I said. "But I think it's time I show everyone what they've been clapping for all these years." I climbed the low altar steps, holding a small remote in my hand. "I won't be long," I told the room. "But I won't be quiet either." I clicked the remote. The projector screen flickered to life behind me. Slide 1, an email from 2017. Subject line, mortgage adjustment approval. Sent to me. My mother copied in. A simple note. "Thanks for keeping this covered while we handle Joe's retirement." Slide 2, my bank statement, recurring transfers to their mortgage servicer every month for 8 years. I watched heads turn, eyes dart. "This," I said calmly, "is what you call generosity, what you treated like obligation." Click. Slide 3, Venmo screenshots, money I sent to Grace for her college books, to Lily for her senior trip. To my mother multiple times, labeled groceries. Repairs, Olivia's fault. Click. Slide 4, a photo of Olivia. Drawing, hands smudged with color. Her face turned away. "This is the child you called sensitive, dramatic, Cinderella. You laughed when she cried, and you told me to lighten up." My mother rose slowly. "Jessica, we don't need to." "Sit down," I said, not loud, not harsh, just final. She did. Click. Slide 5, the church's own donation roster, my name listed. Thousands given, year after year. You called me selfish when I stopped. You called me cold when I stepped back, but I gave. Silently. Repeatedly. And you applauded that silence because it served you. The screen went black. I turned to face them, every cousin, aunt, uncle, and peer. My mistake wasn't giving. My mistake was letting you all believe I had no limits. A breathless hush filled the room. Olivia's fingers curled tighter around mine. "I'm done being the quiet one who makes everyone else comfortable. I won't pay for your comfort with my daughter's peace." Then I looked at Olivia. "Do you have anything to say?" She hesitated. Then stepped forward, chin high. "I'm not trash." Not a shout, not a whisper, just truth. "I'm not a joke, I'm not a problem, I'm Olivia, and I draw because I want to be heard." Someone gasped. Aunt Miriam, maybe. "I'm done being invisible," she said. "And my mom sees me, that's what matters." That's when the shift happened, not from my words, from hers. A slow rustle moved through the room. A few people looked down, a few looked ashamed. And for the first time, Olivia stood in a room full of adults and looked taller than all of them. I took her hand. We turned to leave. Not one person stopped us. 3 weeks later, the quiet of our evenings had shifted. Olivia didn't ask to leave the lights on anymore. She didn't tiptoe around the house like a ghost trying not to be noticed. She started humming while she drew, sometimes even singing softly under her breath, little signs that whatever had cracked inside her was beginning to heal. The school's spring showcase was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Just an hour-long event, tucked between band performances and cookie tables in the cafeteria. Parents were invited to walk the halls and view student artwork, creative writing, science projects. I nearly didn't go. We were tired. It had been a month of friction, relatives trying to guilt-trip me, a few friends from church suddenly too busy to respond, whispers in the grocery store. But Olivia asked me directly that morning, with paint still on her fingertips. "Will you come see my piece?" Of course, I said. I didn't know then what she'd done. I didn't know the scope of what that little heart had poured into one page. When we arrived, the gym was already filling up, families walking hand in hand, snapping photos, clapping for kids in shiny shoes and glittery signs. I spotted her piece before I saw her. It was displayed in the center of the makeshift gallery wall, mounted on black backing paper with a label underneath that read, "Olivia Reed, Grade 4. The artwork was bright, fierce. So unlike the trash drawing I'd seen weeks earlier, this one shimmered. Gold glitter exploded behind a tall, strong girl drawn in bold pinks and purples. Around her were small, smiling faces, children holding hands, some painting, some laughing. But it was the caption that stopped me cold. Across the top, written in careful cursive with a rainbow pen, were the words, "My mom who sees me." I couldn't speak. Next to me, Michael reached for my hand, but even he looked stunned. Underneath Olivia's name, someone, maybe a teacher, had written a short note: "Art inspired by healing and visibility." Parents started gathering around. Some tilted their heads to read. Some asked where she was. And then I saw Ms. Radley, standing near the snack table, smiling like she'd been waiting for this moment all along. "Jessica," she said, walking over, "we didn't realize Olivia had done something so honest. She turned it in just before the deadline. I didn't even see it until this morning." "It's beautiful," I whispered, still not trusting my voice. "I posted a photo of it to the school's page," she said, hesitating just slightly. "With your permission, of course, I can take it down if you're not comfortable." "No," I said quickly. "Leave it up." By the next morning, the photo had been shared over 400 times. By Saturday, local news outlets were requesting interviews. The post had gone viral, not for the glitter or the colors, but for the caption. "See Your Kids" was trending. Mothers began commenting with stories, times they'd missed the signs, or moments they'd finally realized how unseen their children had felt. "I cried reading this," one wrote. "I haven't really seen my daughter in weeks." Another, "This artwork woke something in me. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Jessica." We received emails from counselors, invitations to speak at PTA meetings. A youth center downtown even asked if Olivia would be willing to paint a mural. One evening, while we sat curled up on the couch, Olivia tucked her sketchpad beside her and looked at me shyly. "Do you think they like it?" I turned to her. "They love it. But more importantly, it helped people feel." She nodded, quiet again, but not hiding. The world had seen her, not for her trauma, but for her light. And now, she was painting in gold. I almost didn't answer the door when the bell rang that morning. It was a Sunday, one of the rare peaceful ones. Olivia was upstairs with her headphones on, painting tiny birds across the margins of her math homework. Michael was making pancakes in the kitchen, humming off-key to an old Billy Joel song. I had just settled onto the couch with a fresh cup of coffee, and a rare sense of contentment warming the edges of my chest. Then the doorbell rang again, 2 quick buzzes, firm and flat. I opened it, expecting a neighbor, maybe a volunteer with a church bulletin. Instead, it was a man in a stiff blue windbreaker holding a clipboard and a thick envelope. "Jessica Reed." "Yes." He handed me the envelope, nodded curtly, and walked away before I could even ask what this was about. I closed the door slowly, dread creeping in like a cold draft. Inside the envelope were legal documents. I was being sued by my sister, Linda. The words blurred for a moment as I reread the header: "Complaint for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress." I dropped onto the couch, my coffee forgotten on the end table. Michael walked in, spatula still in hand. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tightening. I handed him the envelope. He skimmed. His eyes darkened. "This is insane," he muttered. But it wasn't, not really, because this was Linda's way. When she couldn't control you with charm, she'd come for your credibility. She claimed my church speech was public defamation, that I smeared her name with malicious intent, causing emotional injury, reputational harm, and undue mental anguish. She listed the family church as a witness venue. She wanted me silenced, wanted the truth labeled slander. Michael sat down beside me, rubbing his temples. "She's trying to punish you for speaking, for finally not playing nice. And she's using the court to do it," I whispered. I stared at the paperwork, numb. The suit didn't demand jail time or even a huge amount of money, just enough to be a threat, enough to scare, enough to discredit, because Linda didn't want justice. She wanted revenge. The next week was a blur of phone calls, consultations, emails to local attorneys. Everyone said the same thing: her case was weak, but not entirely baseless. After all, I had spoken publicly. I had named patterns, pointed fingers, stood in front of a crowd, and exposed a dynamic our family had long denied. And the church? They weren't rushing to defend me. Not officially. The pastor hadn't returned my last call. Our cousin Rachel, who used to message me photos of her kids weekly, stopped texting altogether. Even some of Olivia's teachers suddenly grew polite but distant, supportive on social media, but radio silent in the real world. That was the worst part, the slow drip of people choosing neutrality. And yet I wasn't sorry. Not for speaking. Not for showing Olivia how to stand up. Not for refusing to fund silence anymore. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. One night, Olivia wandered into my room while I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by documents and notes. She didn't ask what I was doing. She just crawled into my lap, her small arms wrapping around me. "Are they trying to make you stop being my mom?" she asked, my heart cracked wide open. "No, baby," I whispered into her hair. "No one can do that." She sat back to look at me, eyes serious. "Then they're not going to win." I smiled, the kind that wobbles but holds. "No, they're not." Later that night, I sat with Michael on the porch, our legs stretched out over the steps. The lawsuit loomed between us like a third person. "I keep wondering," I said, "if I should have just kept my head down, paid quietly, let it slide." "You'd still be paying," he said, "and Olivia would still be shrinking." I looked up at the sky. The stars were faint but present. "So now what?" I asked. He exhaled. "Now we fight back with truth," I nodded slowly, because Linda might have her paperwork, but I had something stronger, a daughter who wasn't afraid to speak, and a voice I was never going to silence again. The letter from the bank arrived 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed. It wasn't unexpected. Once the mortgage payment stopped and no one stepped in to cover the gap, the clock had started ticking. Still, seeing the foreclosure notice in black and white sent a strange shiver through me, like standing on the edge of a cliff you'd already decided to jump from, only now you were realizing how high it really was. Michael read it first. He didn't say much, just handed it to me with a quiet sigh, like someone offering a folded flag after a long war. The family home was going to auction. The house I'd spent years keeping afloat. The house where Olivia had scrubbed dishes for cousins who called her names. The house where I'd swallowed myself to keep others comfortable. And yet, part of me still mourned it. I stood at the kitchen window that night, staring out into the yard as the sun dipped below the trees. Olivia was painting on the patio table, streaks of silver and blue smudging her cheeks. I heard her humming again. She was okay. That was all that mattered. Still, something inside me felt unfinished. I didn't want the house back, but I wasn't ready to watch it vanish like it had never mattered. That's when the phone rang. Blocked number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, a pull I couldn't explain, made me answer. "Hello." A beat of silence. Then, "Jessica, it's Dr. McKinley from your undergrad days." My chest tightened. Dr. Ellen McKinley had been my psychology professor during my junior year at Ohio State. Stern but fair. Brilliant, the kind of woman who made you feel both seen and deeply challenged. We hadn't spoken in years. "Dr. McKinley, hi," she chuckled softly. "I saw the news piece about Olivia's art. I wasn't sure it was you at first, but then I recognized the name, the eyes." "The eyes?" I asked, confused. "You both have that same look, like you've been watching the world from the sidelines for too long, and now you're ready to step in." I swallowed. It's been a strange few months. I can imagine. That church clip is going around, too. I felt a flicker of discomfort. "Not my finest moment." "On the contrary," she said, "it was your finest. You spoke truth, unvarnished." Another pause, then she said something that froze me in place. "I bought your family's house." "What?" "I've had my eye on it for years. It's in a location I've been scouting for a youth outreach project. When I saw it hit pre-foreclosure, I moved quickly." I sat down, stunned. "You bought the house." "I did," she said. "But I didn't call to gloat, Jessica. I called with an offer." I blinked. "What kind of offer?" "I'll sell it back to you for $1. I laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "That's generous." "There's a condition," she added. "Of course there is. You can't live in it." I stopped cold. "I want you to turn it into something better than it ever was, a space for teens who have been silenced, bullied, overlooked, a place where they can speak and be heard." I couldn't respond right away. "I know it's a big ask," she continued, voice gentle. "And I know it comes at a strange time, but I've watched the way you've used your voice, your daughters, too. I think you're the right person to make that space real." I looked at the ceiling, the crack in the drywall we still hadn't patched. Everything in my life felt held together with thread and hope. "You don't need to answer now," she said. "Just think about it." I hung up and sat in silence. The house. The one I'd kept alive like a ghost, now offered back to me, not as a home, but a promise. I drove out there that weekend. Alone, pulled into the old driveway, weeds poking through the cracks like nature trying to reclaim its space. I stood on the porch where Olivia had once sat with scraped knees, the place where I'd dropped off groceries in winter storms. The stoop where I'd once waited for a thank you that never came. It was hollow now, empty, but full of memory. Could I turn this into something better? Could I stand in this space and scrub out the shame? Maybe, maybe not. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back in just to fill the silence again. This time, if I stepped inside, it would be to speak, to rebuild, to make visible what had once been hidden. The past had offered me a key, but it was up to me to decide which door I wanted to open. It was Christmas Eve when I finally made my decision. The house keys sat on our mantel for 2 full weeks, in a plain white envelope with my name on it, Jessica Reed, scrawled in Dr. McKinley's firm handwriting. I passed it every day, staring at it like it was a mirror I wasn't ready to face. But that morning, something shifted. Olivia was setting up candles for our little at-home ceremony. We had started a new tradition, lighting 1 candle for each truth we promised to honor in the coming year. She picked green this time, for courage. I picked blue for clarity. Michael stood beside us, arms folded, a quiet protector. And I knew as I looked at the flames flickering against our kitchen window that clarity had arrived. I wouldn't keep the house, not to live in it, not to retreat into old walls even if repurposed. I'd found something better than comfort. I'd found purpose. So I put on my coat and scarf, tucked the envelope under my arm, and drove to the local press office. By noon, the announcement was live. Jessica Reed declines property offer, donates inheritance to fund new youth arts nonprofit. Project Visible. I attached a short personal statement. This house was once a place where silence lived. I'm choosing to build a place where stories breathe. Project Visible will be a creative sanctuary for teens who feel erased in their own homes. We will see them, hear them, and remind them that their voice is not a problem. It's a power. By 5 p.m., I was back home, helping Olivia slice apples for our little Christmas cobbler. She didn't ask where I'd gone, but she smiled in that soft, knowing way she had, the one that told me she'd felt the shift, too. Then, just as the sun sank and candles flickered lower, there was a knock at the door. Michael opened it, and there stood my father, Joe, holding his hat in his hands, shoulders hunched, like a man who had finally run out of excuses. He looked at me, then past me. "Can I meet her?" he asked, voice hoarse. "Really meet her for the first time." Olivia peeked out from behind me, unsure. I knelt to her level. "You don't have to if you don't want to," I whispered. "But if you do, it's okay." She studied him long and quietly. Then slowly she walked to the doorway and held out her hand. He took it. No tears, no speeches, just that moment. A cautious truce, blooming in the candlelight. We didn't eat dinner as a whole family that night. But we lit all the candles. And one of them, the last one, was for peace. Not the kind you force, not the kind that silences, but the kind that comes after standing tall. The kind you earn. The letter came on a Wednesday. Just a simple envelope tucked between grocery flyers and a coupon for tile cleaner. But this one didn't ask anything of me. It gave. A local donor, anonymous, moved by Olivia's art and the story of Project Visible, had written a personal check. The amount. Enough to launch the center. Enough to pay for the first year's rent, supplies, therapy sessions, and even a small staff. I read the letter 3 times, heart pounding. No strings. No name, just a note scribbled at the bottom. "Thank you for seeing her, for helping us all see." I pressed it to my chest. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, paint swatches, and permit applications. Thomas stepped forward immediately. He volunteered as treasurer, quietly donating his time without fanfare, like he was still trying to rewrite his own chapters, too. "I don't have the words yet," he told me one evening while crunching numbers over Chinese takeout. "But I've got spreadsheets, that's something." I smiled. It was everything. Olivia, now something of a local hero in sparkly sneakers, joined an art camp hosted at the center. She made friends who spoke in colors and metaphors. Kids who knew what it felt like to shrink, and who now, like her, were learning to stretch. Every Sunday morning, while the city still slept, I walked the garden path behind the nonprofit building. The space had once been a vacant lot, littered with beer cans and weeds. Now, thanks to community volunteers, it bloomed tulips, climbing ivy little wooden benches. I'd walk that loop with a cup of chamomile, let the cool morning breeze wrap around me and breathe. No one asked me for money. No one whispered that I was too much. No one waited for me to serve or explain or shrink. I was just Jessica, woman, mother, builder of something that didn't need my silence to survive. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running. I was rooted. One afternoon, as I painted the final touch on the welcome sign, gold leaf lettering, of course, Olivia tapped my shoulder. "Can we hang my new painting in the front window?" she asked. I turned to look. It was a bright image, dozens of silhouetted figures all facing forward, each with different skin tones, hairstyles, clothes. But every face was turned toward a sun in the corner, and written beneath it were the words, "You don't need permission to shine." I knelt beside her. "You're not just visible anymore," I said. "You're radiant." She beamed. "So are you." We hung the painting together, the sun catching the glass just right. And in that light, in that room that hadn't existed a year ago, I knew. This wasn't the end of a hard chapter. It was the first page of something entirely new. The auditorium was packed, rows upon rows of folding chairs, proud parents craning their necks for a glimpse of their kids in crimson caps and gowns. The air buzzed with the kind of nervous joy that only comes when something ends and begins in the same moment. Olivia was in the second row, third seat from the left. I found her right away. She wasn't the tallest. She didn't wave or mouth high like some of the others, but she looked straight ahead, calm, steady, a quiet light radiating from her, my girl. The ceremony blurred around the edges, speeches, songs, names being read one by one. But when they called hers, my breath caught in my throat. "Olivia Rose Reed." She walked up slowly, took her diploma, paused for the camera. And then, instead of walking straight back to her seat, she turned, walked right toward me. People murmured. Cameras clicked. She stopped at my row, reached out, and handed me the rolled-up diploma, a whisper just loud enough for me to hear. "For you." I couldn't speak. She smiled just a little and returned to her seat. Michael squeezed my hand. I felt Thomas on the other side, dabbing at his eyes like he'd caught a piece of dust. And all I could think was, the legacy is broken. Not the bloodline, not the name, but the silence. The weight. The unspoken rule that women must carry, and girls must shrink, and truth must bend. It was over. We walked out into the sunlight after the ceremony, the school lawn dotted with proud families and awkward photo ops. Olivia tugged at her cap. "Do I have glitter on my face?" I laughed, brushing her cheek. "A little gold, of course," she grinned. "You were so brave," I told her. "Not just today, all of it. You helped me see things I didn't want to see. You reminded me how to fight." She tilted her head. "You didn't need reminding, you just needed permission." That stopped me. Because she was right. All those years I'd been waiting for someone to give me permission to draw a boundary, to speak, to step back, to stop carrying what wasn't mine, and no one ever had until her. We took pictures under the big oak tree where the graduates had tied ribbons for luck. Olivia tied two, one red, one gold. "For the past," she said. "And the future," I finished. Later that night, back at home, we sat by the window eating leftover cake. The nonprofit was still growing, still serving, still becoming, but tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was about this small, quiet moment, this peace, this earned, beautiful peace. I looked at Olivia, now taller than I ever imagined she'd be, and whispered what I wished someone had told me years ago. "You never had to earn your worth, it was always there." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I know," she said softly, "because you showed me." That's where this story ends and where so many others begin. If you've made it to this point, thank you. Thank you for listening, for watching, for feeling. Drop a red fire in the comments if this journey moved you, and tell me, what part of Jessica and Olivia's story stayed with you the most? And remember, whether you're a mother, a daughter, or somewhere in between, you don't need permission to shine. You already do.